So before we start, just about like 2 seconds back, I was being enlightened to the fact that whenever you need to moderate a session after lunch, you need to start with provocative statements. And I just told my friends that if I could have done it, I would have done many more things in my life, and I have not done anything like that till date. So, and how provocative fluency can be is another point to ponder. Like some people either like it a lot, and some people do not, and some people moderately like it. But how provocative can it be? I seriously don't know. Rather, in the panel, if we can try and look at this issue of whatever work is happening across the country on fluency from the perspective of so fluency, when Shailaja was presenting, we can clearly see that fluency is a construct, is an academic construct. It is a construct as per cognitive science, and there is a big theoretical understanding that it brings along with itself. So there is fluency as a construct, but there is also fluency as a practice, as an implementable thing. They overlap, but they do not overlap completely often. Like whenever we are working, so, you know, people would generally call this as a science to service or a construct to service gap. And the notion is that this gap is hinging on something like an inefficiency somewhere within a system. There is a gap because people have not been able to do it. But if you look at implementation very, very closely, you would often find that the gap is not attributable to a particular inefficiency within a system or in a region or somewhere alone. It is a complex interplay of various things. So, implementation is itself a field of study. And there are various nuances that it can actually bring to the table. And this, it probably, as thinking practitioners, we have the good fortune, we have that unique position to be able to look at the academic construct and as well as what the knowledge construction on the ground. And then we can see how are these two coming together, often influencing each other. This should be the theme of our panel. And we think that we are going to have quite a few uh, diverse views and even provocative statements, and they are necessary, because if we do not have very strong debates, also the knowledge construction doesn't happen. So I would invite. So this is going to be the this is how the panel should work. For the first 10 minutes, we would ask the panelists to present about their work on fluency, about their work on reading, in the premise of their own organization or a certain project that they have taken forward. Because I know that we have Reshma ji here who's going to talk about this wonderful FLS study that has happened. I mean, yes, we know that we need to know many, many more things about it, but the fact that this has happened in India for the first time needs to be applauded. And we would and she's somebody who's held it very closely on the ground in Maharashtra. So we would really want to know about her experiences of that. There's Gayatri who's going to talk a lot more about they've got many experiences of fluency testing. Madhukar will tell us more about his efforts in bringing reading and in a government narrative, and how is that learning shaping up. uh, Sona ma'am has seen how this app Tara has probably worked in many of her schools. So she will be able to tell us from the government's perspective about the learnings that she would want to retain and would want to highlight. And there could be much more. Let's start with this. And as it proceeds, we will plant a few more questions, very simple and non provocative ones, to promise. Over to Gayatri.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I think thank you for having me here. Wanted to start before I get into the presentation with a thought that I've been having. Last month, I was in a panel where we were discussing numeracy, and like this group, it was a very diverse group. I have, in my 10, 12 years of working in the space of education, I realized that until now, a lot of us have been working in silos. And today, also having the tech side of it in the same room is a great start for me. So I think in my mind, the whole collaborative ecosystem that we are developing into is a great start. So I wanted to start with that, and thank you for joining today. I'm sorry. Okay, so again, I had some slides on FLN, the levels and all, which I'm going to skip. I think we've spoken a lot about what fluency is, what learning levels we are at, and by and large, we are all sensitive to the concerns that we have in the space of literacy and numeracy. My focus today during the presentation is going to be more on the assessments. And when I say FLN assessments, we are pretty young in this space. We started doing FLN assessments in its original format, I think, before 6 years. So we've been doing it for 6 years, and a couple of projects that I'll talk about. And in that process, we've also tried to transition into the tech aspects of it. So what I wanted to focus on today was on the challenges and the pros and cons of each of these, and how we can maybe, for some we have answers, for some we are still struggling or looking for answers. So I'll skip some of these slides. I think we've spoken about NEP and Nipun enough. I'm not spending a lot of time on that. When it comes to FLN outcome, and again, two aspects of it, right? We've been talking about fluency as one of the indicators, but when we do the assessment, it somewhere becomes the main measure. So I'm going to talk more about numbers today, and which is where ORF is something which is very dear to us, because ultimately that's an indicator that tells us whether fluency has got developed or not. In the space of FLN, I think, and I'll focus more on literacy today, we all know the concerns, right? We have children who probably are good with akshar, but not good with word decoding. There are some exceptional children that you find in the most remote area who can read very well with prosody, with meaning. But generally, this is all dependent on one or two teachers. And there are also now, after the NEP part, there are also systems that are getting put in place. So there are projects like Mission Ankur and others, where there are structured pedagogy approaches being taken, and some of those we are evaluating. So for the group that really is not familiar with the term, it is a top-down approach where the pedagogy for each classroom session is pre-designed and given to the teachers. Teachers are trained to deliver the content. Now we can have the view whether that's the right approach, what happens to teacher autonomy, but I'm not getting into it. The idea is to, one, do the student learning outcome assessments, which is the ORF or numeracy expertise. But the other side is also evaluating the process on what are the enabling factors that are making the assessments or increase in FLN visible. So we are involved in both types of projects. One is, of course, the student learning outcome projects, which are more quantitative in nature, slightly straightforward because it's better understood than the process evaluations space. But there are also projects with currently that we've started with Tamil Nadu, and with Madhya Pradesh and UP, we are working on process evaluation of structured pedagogy also. I'll try to focus on bigger aspects of it. I've not gone into very specific outcomes of each of the projects, but if needed, we can discuss, or I can share those data points later. Before we get into the FLN aspect, and I think broadly the group knows, I want to talk about the way FLN tools are designed. So when we started working on FLN tools, there were batteries that were used by multiple organizations. However, a standardized approach was required. And we also started, like the Western principles, we started through EGRA. And while we were studying EGRA and coming up with these subtasks that we need to evaluate, uh, the same realizations on Sanyukta Akshar, Matra, orthography, and other elements started coming in. And the tool that we have currently is one grade specific, which is different from EGRA. There are specific subtasks, both in literacy and numeracy, which are more contextually relevant for India. And the way subtasks are designed, they account for all the nuances that Indian languages have. So starting from number of matras at which grade, in which order to test, to complexity of Sanyukta Akshar and other things. So we've tried to keep everything together and have customized the tool to make it more Indian languages oriented, or you can say vernacular aspect. Typically, what you see on the screen is how the evaluator carries a set of almost a booklet in their hands. So the evaluator who goes, and these are one-on-one assessments. The evaluators who go and interact with students, they do it in one-on-one space. Each interaction roughly takes around 25 to 30 minutes. And the evaluator, while the student answers, because this is an oral test, while the student answers, the evaluator marks each of these things in papers. You get the data back, then you enter the data, and then the data is processed. That's how the pen paper aspect of it works. All the different subtasks that are covered, especially in the literacy part, are starting from as simple as listening comprehension. I was talking to ma'am before this meeting, and she was just sharing how Hindi can also be Haryanvi Hindi and Bihari Hindi and Jharkhandi Hindi. So I think while we say we have Hindi as one language that is followed by 7 states, there are multiple variations. And at grade 1 level, even listening comprehension from the fluency perspective becomes important. So we generally start with listening comprehension, go into oral vocabulary where we have around 10 items, and these items are 10 pictures, and these are mix of objects, emotions, and actions. So cycle chalata hai, khana khata hai, so ro raha hai, has raha hai, and something like ghar, machli, chhata, very immediate environment things that we ask for. After that, there's something which is initial sound identification. This we try and use for grade 1, but mainly for English, because again, with the transparent orthography, we've realized that this particular subtask doesn't really help much. And we've never talked about first sound, because whatever the letter is, that's the sound. So initially, we also realized that students find the instruction itself very difficult. You go and tell them, eat ka pehla dwani batao, for them it's ईंट का पहला ध्वनि ई है, उसमें क्या बताना. So I think we've started dropping this more and more, but when we started, we had this. Letter reading, both accuracy and fluency, where in one fluency aspect, we have a time duration, fixed time duration of 1 minute. Accuracy is generally to check whether students understand different sorts of letters, generally complex letters. Similarly, for word, there is also non-word reading. So we were talking about the whole decoding exercise this morning, right? And we also have a graphical memory. So over a period of time, when I keep seeing certain words repeatedly, I store them as an image in my mind too. Now it's easier to reproduce that word from that imagery, but that does not assure me the decoding ability in the child. So when you have non-word reading, these are the words that do not exist in that language. So something like, right now I'm okay, something like bati, which is not a word in Hindi, will be put there. So child has to actually read ba, ta, e, and come up with the answer as bati, so that they identify whether we can identify whether they can decode or not. Then it goes into oral reading fluency, which is better understood by all of us. It is typically a connected text that we give. And there are reading comprehensions. For higher grades, we retain one reading comprehension of the previous grade and use one of that same grade. So if you look at this grade 2 setup, they will have 2 passages to read. This reading is not monitored. Only the question answers are done there. And then you have a couple of dictation exercises. At grade 1, we do only letter writing. For grade 2 and 3, we have words and sentence writing also. This is mainly to also understand whether fluency in writing is developing or not. I think someone mentioned in the morning that writing is a concern. So this is a typical subtask test that we assess. The biggest challenge here is, and because many of our projects work in multilingual aspects, there is an additional step after translation, and rather than translation, I would call it often creation of tool. But of course, because we need to retain certain aspects which are uniform, we try and pick items which can be kept across languages. But after that, we do harmonization. Now, the harmonization exercise is as simple as having X number of letters. So I'll take one example of, I think, banana. So banana is a very simple orthography in Hindi, kela, and which is understood in red. It is understood by everyone alike because it exists in our immediate environment. But kela as a word is easy to read. When you go to Telugu language, it's a very complex script. And if the child has to read it, they will find it difficult. So we will use something which has two matra, two letter word. So that kind of harmonization across languages happens is the second step. And after that, we generally do a pilot. So reliability is checked by actually doing at least 400, 500 students testing. And that's how the tool is finalized on the basis of data. So I have already mentioned about the types of evaluations that we do. One is student learning outcomes, which is comprising of the subtasks that I just mentioned. The other aspect is the process evaluation, which is very qualitative and which is also very complex. And a lot of challenges that also Sakti was talking about, the success of any scaled up FLN intervention lies a lot on the compliance to the process also, right? And that is where I think the good part is there is now focus on the process evaluation and compliance that is coming up. When we will look at some of the results, we will see that compliance is going to be a huge problem for us when we move forward. 2 minutes, okay. Okay. I'll skip some of the slides which talk about the projects that we are doing. I want to focus more on compliance. Okay, quickly. The first project that we did around COVID time, I think, was easier project because we were working with an organization, LLF, which in itself is an intervention agency. So we had our baseline and endline. Baseline results were taken back, worked on specifically around. I think the challenges were around ORF and word reading, and those were specifically targeted to overcome the gaps. And you can see in the next slide that there was a considerable movement, positive trend that was found at the time of endline. I've not gone into a lot of tables. I've just tried to represent it visually so that I can cover a lot of stuff in 10 minutes. But yeah, broadly, I think uh, promising results. Most of the children were at a certain level of ORF. Incremental values were observed. So, like I was talking to Shailaja also, the challenge when we come to an impact evaluation is once you have your baseline results, how do you really take it forward to make your end line look better? And the whole aspect of intervention in FLN, at least because I'm not an intervention person, I find it extremely complex. And I'm not sure how effectively that can be done. I personally see that as a challenge for any assessment agency, because for me to just go and do the diagnostics is one thing, but then to bring that shift is a very complex area. And I think there a lot of efforts required to be given. This is the Madhya Pradesh project that I was talking about. And this particular slide highlights this blue box. I'm sorry, it has come from somewhere. There are 5 or 6 things that we do where we design questionnaires. Each of these questionnaires have also why questions. So there are compliance questions. Do you follow this, follow that? And then there are why questions, and the data is analyzed to understand actual compliance. Now, the compliance on surface can look like perfect. You go to the classroom, every TLM is there on the wall, everything's perfect. But when you start interacting with them, when you start asking, why are you doing this? That's where you realize that it is probably just compliance, and the students are not getting the benefit of it. So this is going on. Some of the factors I've put on the slides which either aid or hinder the process of FLN interventions at scale, not reading up, but mainly I think when it is well understood, when the trainings are done robustly, the chances of teachers taking it back to the classroom is very high. So this is just one example. This is one heat map of a couple of districts in UP. When we say demonstration districts, these are the districts where the support from the government is very high to make FLN intervention possible. Non-demo districts are the districts which are by and large on their own with minimal support. And in almost all cases, you see that the compliance is pretty much low. There are fewer greens in demo districts because there is higher monitoring. But otherwise, the challenge on making anything scale at the state level is still a challenge. Similarly, for the lesson plans, similar thing was done. And you can see by and large, the compliance on paper might look like it's all being complied with. But when you try and understand the process effectiveness, you realize that it is not happening. And it's not easy because there's this conflict of teacher autonomy versus teacher guidance, and we are still grappling with that whole idea. The last project, and we've done very little in this, is Tamil Nadu, where we have done assessment of 61,000 children currently. Again, it's a structured pedagogy that the state has developed, and we're about to start our process evaluation there. I have a few results here. The results look promising. And this was also something that was led by the state on implementation. Not doubting anything because we are just sitting on very fresh data. But one challenge that you also encounter is when these large scale assessment projects are implemented by teachers, you really do not know the fidelity to the process. Because teachers definitely would want to support their children. So one fear that you always have is this. Typically, we overcome by going and doing field audits. In this case, we couldn't because of certain reasons. I'll just quickly close with the operational challenges. So 2, 3 challenges that pen paper assessments really throw at us. One-on-one evaluation, that means you need a really high quality evaluators who can, starting from building rapport with the child to making child comfortable and then to recording the right responses. So the quality of evaluators to look for say something like 60,000 students becomes a huge bottleneck. So that's one challenge. Second, whenever the execution is happening at the partner's end, whoever that partner is, the ability to sign off on the fidelity of the processes is we are slightly underconfident on those aspects. That's one thing. The data collection. So on pen paper, I can do assessments, maybe 5, 10 a day. I can hire evaluators, I can do it. But transferring that data into, say, a digital file and then doing analysis can be a roughly around 45 to 50 days of process, which is a huge loss of time. And the effectiveness of data, especially in an impact evaluation, is only when it is made available immediately. So that's where I think what we have tried to do is get into an app too, but we are still not into speech recognition. The idea is to see how the data can be made available very quickly. I'll leave at this. I'll just put the last slide here, which are the 3 main areas we think people can take back to make success FLN at the state level successful. One of the things that I personally feel is a lot of advocacy and dialogues have to happen because, like we discussed, the focus is a lot on numbers and not on how to make it possible in a holistic way. So that's another thing.
Thank you, Gayatri. I think let's also listen to Reshma ji now. And, the perspective that she would bring onto the table about how an effort of fluency benchmarking and fluency testing happens across a particular state, given there is government involvement and UNICEF's involvement to a high degree. Let's get into that.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So while the PPT is being put up, I'm just going to sort of give you a background. I'm sort of doing my PPT in 3 parts. The first part will be around the FLS study, which was what I was asked to speak on. Now, the FLS study was led by NCRT with UNICEF support, and AIR was our partner in it. So all the technical aspects of it, I'm sort of presenting on behalf of that team. I'm not the technical expert on assessments. Then I have my colleague here, Maithili, with me, who was actually an observer while the data was being collected in Maharashtra, I've asked her to sort of share her experience of the whole data collection process. And in the third part, I'll sort of just talk about the efforts in Maharashtra, since I'm leading the work in Maharashtra for UNICEF, how the data is being used, what are the efforts we are making in the state to work around FLN in the state, and what are the questions that we have where we would like to collectively work with all of you. So that's sort of the broad outline of my presentation today. So starting with the FLS study, I'm not sure if everybody's looked at the report. Okay, but just to sort of very quickly go on the objectives. I mean, this presentation that I got from my colleague in Delhi was like 36 slides. I'm going to share it with you in 5 slides because the report is available. You can read more on it, but just broadly speaking, so that we're more in line with the conversation we're having today in this room. It was to establish the Nipun Bharat baseline and the proficiency benchmarks for reading with fluency and comprehension for 20 languages, right? This is like we've been saying from this morning, the first of its kind intervention, and we need this to be able to do anything forward in this area. And also establishing the proficiency benchmarks for numeracy, and it sort of helped with the reporting in this area. So why FLS is unique? It's one of the largest assessments being done in the world because we are also such a big country. So we bring in that kind of numbers. But it also sets the example for other countries that are attempting to sort of follow suit. And it's the first ever study, like Shakti was saying, for India to do something like this. It's been a huge exercise after NAS, after the NAS, and to focus on FLS has been a very important aspect, which the policies have also sort of been talking about. And now we have something that sort of tells us where we are. And like I said, it's covering more than 80,000 students and 10,000 schools, and more than 18,000 teachers were involved in the process, with investigators from the field as well, and covered 20 languages. Now, what did it cover, right? It covered oral language comprehension, phonological awareness, decoding, picture reading comprehension, and oral reading fluency with comprehension. So like Shelja was mentioning, usually we've used the pillars. Now, the diagram of the pillar, which was also in this presentation, and I think different people have different ways in which they're approaching where the different pillars are for language learning, right? And so because of this different aspects that were covered in the test, there were different items in the test that covered each of these areas, right? And there was and all the details are available if you want. I can always share that with you. So what was the experience of data collection like when it happened in Maharashtra? Maithili, if you want to talk from there? Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm audible here. Yeah. So the role that UNICEF had in many states and in Maharashtra as well is to go in as observers. And then it was more to gather experiences of what's happening in the field. Again, this is the first time ever that it had taken place. So we were a part of all the orientation and training of the FIs. I think like what was mentioned in your presentation, because it's a one-to-one, how do you best train? And I think there were over 10,000 field investigators. So there were online orientations, I think, in terms of to save time, but it was also cascade. So each district, I think, had a nodal, and then they had to go in and select field investigators for their district. And then there was another training for the field investigators. And then you had a dry run, I think, which was one of the other aspects that was done here is have it in schools, have all the FIs in that particular district come to a school and administer it. Not a very technical thing, but what I observed was there was a lot of apprehension on the part of the FIs during the dry run. It was the first time that they were doing something like that, the OMR sheet, and you had to fill in and you had to time how much time is a child taking to say a particular paragraph, count what we had looked at the manual way of doing it. But But at the end of the dry run, I think there was a lot of, one, of course, confidence, but also the realization that something like this can be done, or this is one way in which assessment can be done. The other thing, so this was a dry run, but in the actual, when this was administered, I think what did help is that the teachers who were doing it, and some of them were really good, were from the context of the child. So if there were certain things, for example, I remember numeracy, there was, I think, it was like a data they had given, okay, chocolates, 5 children like it, and they had some 5 figures, and then, candy, so many liked it. And I remember one child having confused, or because you use Cadbury in Maharashtra as a synonym for everything, for a chocolate could look like a candy. It's not. So the child continuously gave responses in that way, and this teacher caught on to it. And he actually went back to the child and he asked, and he said, okay, this is what you mean conceptually. The child knows, he's just calling it Cadbury, and he's calling everything Cadbury. And I think these are the things that were really interesting to note. Yeah, so I think uh, post this, when as an observer you sit with the FIs and you're asking them how they felt and what they have done, I think they had the same thing to say, that one, it is daunting to collect such data. uh, I think they had that sense of responsibility that, we have to mark it in a particular way. I know that the children were very cooperative, because they were given, I mean, the teachers were also told how to approach them. I think a lot of times when people do assessments, that's the thing you also realize, that children, when you have a stranger and it is not a teacher, fumble, they can be a little nervous. And I think there was a lot of rapport building exercises that they were expected to do. So yeah, so this is just very loosely, I mean, there's nothing very technical in that sense, but I think these are the experiences. One, it was a huge challenge, and I don't think there still remains, because the FIs were new. I mean, all the field investigators, including the observers, were new for this sort of an exercise. But I think post that, the data was taken and entered, and I think that's a exercise that happened at the central level. But this is, I think, more at the state.
Thank you. So, so moving on from that, what we found from the FLS study, that there were 3 main groups of students: those who were doing well on all the constructs, those who were struggling with the decoding, and those who were struggling with decoding and fluency. So the importance of each construct that was there leading up to reading comprehension, and therefore the curriculum, the teacher training, the future classroom-based assessments all need to be taken care of as we move forward. Now, what are the learnings for us from the FLS study in the state, right? One is, it is the only study at scale covering 20 languages, right? This is the only set of data that we have. 2, the benchmarking has been done for 20 languages. We know what the starting point for us is. 3rd, like Maithili was saying, we've now used 18,000 teachers, people from the system, and as they are doing this process, their own capacity is also being built on what are the different constructs that are important while they're assessing, to also know that these are important aspects of learning how to read. And 4th is the ownership of the data. Like I think somebody was saying this morning, ASR has all of these issues, and we've never actually accepted ASR in this way. Now this is government data, right? So having said that, what has Maharashtra been doing with this since it's happened, right? So one, there has been a series of capacity building exercises by NCRT as well as UNICEF in them understanding the NAS data and FLS data, and what can you do for using it for planning, right? Now, and we've also helped them sort of unpack what are the FLS efforts that has happened in the state. What are the different modules that are available from the time I see Sujata in the audience, from the time Sujata was in SCRT, modules were developed on reading, on language learning, and till now, every year we come up with a new model. Do we need so many different models, programs, modules? And how do we consolidate them now with this larger learning of the whole Nipun Bharat framework that has been given? Can we sort of say now we're going to stick to this one, and then we're going to keep going with that for a number of years for us to achieve the results that we want? Or do we want to continue changing like we have? The other is, do we want to just stick with numbers, or do we want to look at processes, right? Now, numbers are important, and we know, but the reason why we're doing NAS and FLS every 3 years is because we know that there is a process to be followed before children will learn, right? So there are several interventions that have happened in Maharashtra regarding reading, right? Like starting from pre-NEP, actually, during COVID times, we launched a program with the government called Goshti Cha Shanivar, where digital books were sent out to all children in the state. And the interesting learning, while I can talk about reach numbers, we reached over 3 million children in a span of a year. We got very active participation by teachers, but we also saw a lot of field innovations, right? Which was very, very promising, because um, there were limitations to the program. It was COVID times, the books were only being sent digitally. But we saw people from the field actually take it upon themselves to start reading to children. We saw teachers going to temple mics and using mosque, the sound system, and reading stories to children. We got teachers printing the books out using their own money and putting it on a cycle and taking it to the villages, right? So we saw a lot of innovations coming this way, which told us one thing, that if you give them certain principles and ideas and then give them freedom to do things, a lot of things can happen. We weren't expecting this kind of reach, but we did get it. Resulting from this and other interventions around reading in the state invested in about 10 crores last year to actually print books from leading experts in the state, leading NGOs like Quest. Books were taken, Room to Read books were taken, Pratham books were taken, and they actually took the license to print them and supply them to schools. That's a huge first step in terms of getting good quality books. UNICEF last year concluded a study on libraries in the state to understand what is the status of libraries and how are books being used in school. That sets also another baseline for us to say, where does the state now want to go forward if this is your baseline? And more work needs to be done on building capacity to understand these findings. And my last point here then, therefore, is the continuous need for us to engage with the state on this. It's not going to be a one-time process or one capacity building workshop, but a lot of new things have been unpacked as we've done these studies, and for people to understand how language is acquired. And I think this process, we all need to collectively engage with the state to be able to take forward. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Next, let's ask Madhukar to address us.
Thank you, everyone who went before me. Sorry. So I think, I mean, a lot of the details around just the nuances around assessments, literacy, a lot of them were shared. So I thought I'm going to just share our own experiences, my own sort of observations from running two wonderful organizations. One is Center for Learning Resources, which is one of the oldest education nonprofits in India. It's been there for 40 years, and they've been doing a lot of work and pioneers in early childhood education and English as second language. And a much newer organization, which I happen to found, called Leadership for Equity, which is much more at the cusp of like, how do you help governments build effective policies and then showcase implementations at large scale. So a lot of my learnings and the sharings I'm going to do is broadly based on some of the work we've been doing across these two organizations, because one organization represents the depth, nuanced understanding of pedagogy content for years and years of research-backed, evidence-backed kind of material and learning resources. And one is more about how do you take this kind of research-backed evidences and help the governments to scale, because I think we all know some of the abilities of the governments and the stakeholders to take some of the innovations and skill, let it be literacy or any kind of research-backed evidence, is also very limited. So a lot of our learnings are coming from there, because I think we're seeing a lot of dichotomy and also fantastic learnings in many of these. If CLR is working in Lucknow with about 500 Anganwadis on early literacy program, at the same time, we are helping the Maharashtra government by setting up a program management unit in the SCRT and the Samagra Shiksha, trying to help them to identify what kind of pedagogical books, practices, content, TLM that you can basically try to help the districts adopt. One with English pedagogy, while CLR is trying to sort of scale its own research-backed English pedagogical practices across the Daman schools, 350 schools. LFE is working with the World Bank in Andhra. Of course, EI is also a partner where we're working with the World Bank and the government of Andhra Pradesh to build English pedagogy blended learning course for about 50, 60,000 teachers. So I think like some of the learnings when you get in such a diverse kind of demographies, geographies, and the kind of teachers and governments you work with, some of the learnings I think we've had are incredible. So I'm going to try and consolidate 2, 3 learnings. I won't take much time. One, so my learnings are going to be on 3 broad levels, and I'm going to have one learning specifically on the larger system policymakers at that level, because we work a lot with our governments. A lot of my learnings are going to be around that. Then what I call as the most critical element of any adoption or universalized education, which is a middle management in any government hierarchy, which is basically leave alone your secretaries and bureaucrats, but who are these dietes, your BRCs, CRCs, the cluster officers, the block and district officers, who are critical element for any large-scale adoption. And the third, of course, is our wonderful teachers. So first, let me start with policymakers. I know from morning, I think we've heard a lot of nuanced understanding of literacy, but I think, and I might sound a bit, dull, but how can some of these nuanced, detailed understanding become diluted mandates across government is just fascinating. And I think sometimes we think about like, oh, we are the ones who understand and this thing, but the minute you walk into a government office and you're in front of a IAS officer, secretary, or CEOs, it just completely dilutes. If we've been banging our head on why this 30 words per minute is not going to be the benchmark, and it's much more detailed, and oral reading fluency is much deeper than just 30 words or 60 words per minute, people don't understand that. And I think like and one has to study that. And this is where it's going to be my last provocative statement on how researchers and academia need to look at literacy and these issues. Second piece of it is ownership of the system. I think a couple of people, including Reshma, I think has pointed out around how ownership of data and the government start taking all the theory and research and systems change across the world as said, till the time the system doesn't take ownership of the change, nothing is going to change. You need leaders within the system who are able to talk like this, like the way we are talking about literacy, the way we are looking at data, the way we are saying that things need to be owned at every level, right from a school to like a mantralaya. How can you do that? So it's not just limited to people. It's a combination of people, policy, and process. You might still have a great set of leaders who are saying that, but till the time the policies are not rooted in what is right for the child, what is right for teacher, nothing is going to move. You might have great people, great policy, but till the time processes are not set in the right way, things are not going to be adopted at scale or sustained. So I think it's a combination of those three, which I seem to be the larger reflections. And I know, but I mean, Lokare madam is sitting here. She was a former deputy director of SCRT Maharashtra, which scaled the literacy program. UNICEF knows very well about it, and which reached up to 1 lakh schools and teachers. Even with the kind of efforts that were taken right from the Honorable Minister to SCRT to the ground level, the success rate we were able to hit was about 40-45%. And you should talk more about it to her in your break. But I think some of these learnings of what happens when a well-intentioned, great literacy program moves into a government sort of a setup. So that's broadly from a learnings from a high level, which is a system and policymakers. Now, the second, which I touched upon, which I think is the most critical element, is what I call as middle management. But I think these are the mid-level bureaucrats who are very critical. And unlike developed nations, India as a country, for any public service delivery, if you consider education as a public service, relies heavily on these people. Even though the CEO, the secretary, everyone must be well-intentioned, but till the time your district officers, your block level officers, your BRC, CRCs, because they are the ones who support teachers. That's the closest where the teachers are. If that system or what you call as a yantrana is not strong enough, your teachers are not going to, the reflection of how a government system treats a teacher is the same as how a teacher teaches their child. And people don't seem to understand. It's a linear equation, because if you continuously treat the teacher badly, there is enough evidence to say that the teacher is not going to consider the student like that. And I think this is an absolute reflection of what happens inside the classroom and what happens outside the classroom. And I think, how are we able to support? How does this middle management has that nuanced understanding of literacy, has that understanding of what does it take to really, help children learn? So that's one. And even the research backed tools, right? I mean, data is one thing. We've seen a lot of data, but how do you help this middle management make data-based decision making, and that is a what I call as an academic governance, but it's absolutely critical. Without data, it's impossible to support schools. Even if you have even a simplest, smallest of block in India has about 100 to 150 schools. So think about, or even if you equal it that to a district is about 2,000 to 3,000 schools, which is about 8,000 to 10,000 teachers, right? Think of any private company with about 8,000 employees. What is this kind of skill set that you require in that, or the CEO of that company with 8,000 employees? Are we having the kind of skill set? If not, like, what is the effort we are sort of helping build? And this goes beyond the instructional kind of understanding, right? And I think that's where my pitch is and my sort of contribution to this discussion, because I think there is enough understanding right now. And I know this might be provocative for many sitting in the room, especially academia. I think over the last 30, 40 years, we have done enough research and enough evidence around how literacy operates, how numeracy operates. People might disagree, but there is absolutely no evidence, no enough research on what happens outside of the classroom that really helps uh, universalize any good practices that happen inside. So I feel a lot of effort also needs to go into what is happening inside and what is happening outside. So I feel like that's something we need to sort of put our efforts in. And the lastly, I think, is wonderful teachers. Of course, the life of a teacher in India is a life of compliance. And I think we need to agree with that. They all rely a lot on whenever anyone goes into the classroom, आपका ये lesson plan book है क्या, ये आपका book है क्या, वो midday meal का है क्या, ये है क्या. Some of the teachers in the room might be nodding, but I think that is exactly what we made the life of an Anganwadi worker and the life of a teacher is a life of compliance. So how do you move them to, first of all, build that agency? But unfortunately, agency building is so nebulous as a concept and it's so personal that it cannot be scaled. And that's where the problem lies. So how do you then build a capacity for teachers to think? Because a lot of the assumptions that we are making that teachers are going to have this level of understanding and freedom and agency to adopt any of the best practices is extremely limited understanding. I don't think that is the truth. So I think, how do we sort of move, and then how do you then build a model that works at this scale? Because we're not talking about even, I know KB teachers, I still feel KB teachers are up and some of the best in the country. But I think even when you're building models, literacy ho ya kuch aur ho, think about, someone said the saying of 40, 40 and 40. Think of a 40-year-old teacher who travels for 40 minutes to teach a class of 40 minutes for for 40 students in 40 degrees heat. If you're able to think of a model that actually works well, that 40, 40, 40 teacher, then I think hopefully we'll be able to say that literacy intervention mein adoption hua hai. So I think, like, that's broadly have been the learnings. I know if it might sound a bit negative from what all has been shared, but I thought that perspective is important, especially when you're thinking of, and the problem that we're trying to address is universalization. And the more and more, the seems to binding constraints seems to be pedagogy and governance. Pedagogy pe kafi kaam hua hai. Let's also try and see how this goes hand in hand for the reform of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhukar. Yeah, let me reiterate that it's time that we understand that the implementation of a concept is also a field of study in its own right, and the kind of layers, the kind of nuances, and the kind of pulling us apart in very different directions. All of that, when that happens and when that is studied, it can give you, a real life picture of how children learn in a country like ours. So let's listen to Sona ma'am, because when this Tara app was being used in the Kendriya Vidyalayas, I think she's going to give us a good perspective about how she, as a part of the system, was looking at the whole process and what learnings or what memories she would want to retain.
Good afternoon, everyone. After such erudite speakers, and I feel you've all already spoken about what we were saying, but like Shakti ji said, he actually, in a side note, told me, be positive. So there are a lot of positives, actually. When we started with this, actually, when Eugene was the bridge, actually. Eugene is a teacher in our system. He has been a teacher trainer for a long time. And he mentioned that Dr. Rao and her team has developed this app, which is about automated assessment of reading skills. We were very interested. I'm starting with the app right now. So we were very interested because it is true that assessment is a very subjective activity. And it is largely dependent on the capabilities and competencies of the teachers as well, and various other factors, environmental factors. So we decided and we did a little pilot with 10 schools in Maharashtra. And we took 10 schools from different parts of the state. We took IIT, KV IIT. We also took KV Solapur. So we tried to, find different kinds of schools with different clientele, so to say. And we did a baseline study where initially our teachers and our HMs were sensitized. They were oriented by Dr. Rao's team, by Nagesh. And this was the first lot. And please remember, this was 21-22. Online classes were still on and some places. And the rest, of course, we had come to the offline mode. And after that was a time, please remember, 2 years children had been at home. We claim, and we did, I think everybody in their own way tried to do as much as we could during the online education. But there were large areas which were untouched. Children don't just come to this classroom to study. They learn from each other, they learn from the environment, the social interactions, all that they had missed out on. So the children, we were targeting the class 3, 4, and 5. We initially started, we did all 3, 4, and 5 because we felt the class 3 students were more like class 1 students with a disadvantage. Because the class 1 students were coming to class 1, fresh, age appropriate class, first time to school. The class 3 students were coming to class 3, but they were actually had not faced school at all till then. So anyhow, this exercise was done, the teachers were oriented, and the baseline was done. And that was the target of the app. We called it by a different name then, but it was done. What we did on the side, we designed, Eugene and his team designed a few interventions. He will talk more about it. And we sort of, in 5 schools. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that in the other 5 schools, nothing was done. Normal teaching, learning activities were happening. But in 5 schools, some specific interventions were planned. And thereafter, the baseline was done. Now, the assessments and the details have been shared by ma'am, and they will be shared further. But as far as I know, not very significant differences were there. They weren't. Nagesh?
So actually, I think it's shown the slide where grade 3 and 4 sort of moved just marginally, but grade 5 had a significant improvement.
No, but that was in all the 10 KVs.
I know.
There was not much difference between the 5.
Between the KVs, yes.
Between the 5 so-called, you could say, group which had no specific interventions, but the normal teaching learning activities happening, and 5 where there were some specific interventions happening. What I'm trying to say is the teaching learning, to some extent, it is as it is the part of the school learning system, but perhaps with a larger and more planned exercise, we might have different results. Anyhow, along with this activity side by side, we have been conducting what is because of FLN and the NEP, we have also been assessing our students on FLN as per the Nipun Bharat mission, and also some other rubrics. So numeracy and literacy skills of students of class 1, 2, and 3 are being assessed. And these assessments are being done in the system at the entry level, mid-level, and end term level. And there also we have seen the gradual increase, just like, most of the study is different, but because we have not done it, we won't say it is we are not calling it a research as such, because normally research means variables should be, controlled. There should be, there is a lot of subjectivity in these assessments, no doubt. Our teachers were guided, they were oriented, they were told that the performance of the students is not necessarily a reflection on their competencies. This has to be done at times to ensure that there is no artificial elevation of results and scores. But however, um, this assurance was given to the teachers, and teachers were taught, and this kind of assessment has been happening, but that, as I said, was a manual assessment. Now, that manual assessment and the ORF assessment, which has been done through the Tara app, to some extent, there is an overlapping, although we need to do much more on that front. So we have those scores, and there has been talk of, but we have done it in a few areas, and there has been overlapping. Now, coming to the learnings, if I may say so. One thing this app has done, it has, to some extent, definitely eliminated the subjectivity. Like ma'am had said, Hindi across the country is spoken so in so many different tones and dialects that, and then we are KV, we say we call ourselves mini India. So we have teachers from Haryana, for example, in Tamil Nadu. We have teachers. All our teachers, obviously the mother tongue influence is there when they're speaking the other language also, whether English or Hindi. Now, assessment through Tara has to some extent perhaps taken care of those issues, we believe. Not accurately, but still we think it has done. But more than that, what this has done, I'll just share a few visuals with you here. These are some of our teachers administering the app. A couple of videos, yeah. So if you notice, some of them are doing it in isolation, and many of them are doing it within the classroom situation. This also varies from place to place. Some places, and then of course the noise factor and all, it comes in. Here you can see, I believe this is a video. Can we run it? Yeah. Sound? Wasn't very audible, I think. Doesn't matter. You have heard the audios earlier. These were just a few visuals, you could say. So you can see this is how it was done. The teacher's Android phone. Of course, I think we've conveyed to Dr. Rao and Nagesh and the team that now they want it on laptops and Apple and the iPads and everything. They feel it would help more. Anyhow, I'll just move on to another. These are all actually videos, but
bright yellow. It is the color of the sun. We find gold deep inside the earth. It resides far away from the sun.
anyhow, so there'll be so many more, but what I was trying to show, see some children, they're reading, some are something they are reciting. All that happens. But anyhow, while this was being done, it generated a lot of interest amongst the teachers also. And now teachers, many of them have actually, because so much is available online, they have found other audio books, and they have also found other material, and they are making a lot of reading activities happening in the class. They are conducting various other interventions which they think will help. KVS, we already had a very strong class library system that is being used a little more. I'm sure Eugene will have more to share, many more activities and things are happening in the class. But basically, I think largely this is has worked as an enabling tool, this ORF, the Tara app. And like Sir had said in the morning, this is just a beginning, we believe. This is not enough. Why? Because all our teachers feel you need to include listening exercises and some kind of comprehension exercises. Otherwise, to some extent, yes, children, some of them, many of them in fact, who have learned to read well, read with greater fluency, sometimes even with some expression without actually understanding. So they think that comprehension aspect has to be built in. If it can be built into the app, it would be a good idea. Other than that, yes, teachers are excited not just about this, that sense of ownership which has been spoken about. This has to some extent led to that also. And hopefully, these various practices which are happening in silos earlier, as we were saying, we want to bring them into our system. They already are part of our system, but even more, and make them systemic practices. KVS actually excels at that, I would like to say. We start off with something, we always start with a pilot, and then gradually we make it part of our system. So how can we do more and more of it? We'd like to learn during the day. Thank you.
Do we have time for one round of questions that I may have for my panelists? Okay. So let's start with Reshma ji. As we've been discussing, that whenever we are trying to, for example, a fluency benchmark exercise is often trying to ascertain a particular threshold for that particular language and script in which somebody would read with a basic level of fluency and comprehension. But that threshold, when suddenly in the implementation world starts becoming a goal to drive, they are not often the same things. So whenever, so I mean, can you just give us some insights, like even if it's a side conversation with the teacher or an anecdote or something where you've seen that, here is a very sophisticated academic exercise and here is something which is getting scaled in a very simpler manner, and you may be concerned about it or you're happy about it, some things, like some insights on that.
So, I mean, I think, Shakti, what you are saying is often.
No, you need to put.
Yeah. So, I think what you're saying is often what happens in a system, right? Because in system there are people interpreting things and then transferring that knowledge through a grapevine where everything sort of gets interpreted how they want, right? So it's bound to happen. It's a matter of how consistently you message in the system and over a period of time. So currently maybe the understanding is, and it's become this gold standard, whatever that we're working towards, without enabling them with the right processes that will enable them to sort of at least progress, maybe not reach the goal, but make some progress. So I think that's the effort where we need to really come together in terms of breaking it down to say that if we do want to make progress, this is what we're doing, and then it will happen naturally as capacities within the system increase.
Absolutely. I mean, today Madhukar mentioned that it would be ideal to see a government official speaking about literacy in the way many of us are speaking here, which means that how do we ensure, I mean, whether we ensure it or not, like how does a system ensure that there is sophisticated knowledge within the system, there's knowledge getting created within the system or getting transferred through collaborations, whatever it is. What would you think would be the steps to get there? It won't be overnight, of course, but how would you think it can gradually evolve, like simple milestones?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it starts from co-creation is what we thought, right? Let it be even in terms of creating any, say, literacy programs or any material that is going down to the schools and children. What we have seen working, which also is also a lot of us are adopting now, is like how do you get in some of the experts or the expertise that we as organizations or researchers carry, sit with the SCRTs and diets to say that, look, there are out of the 10 things, there are 8 things you're doing great. These are the 2 things, maybe running a good targeted literacy program, targeted numeracy program. Can we sit with you? Can we design? Because there's also wisdom that exists in your own office. So how do you then sit across, try to build that? I think is the first step, because we have enough evidences now that some of the practices that we were following as organizations in, say, let it be piloting or doing some research and then putting something out there and then taking it to scale, a lot of it is now being followed by the diets that we were working with. We work across 7. A simple thing is, before even you train a set of 50, 100 teachers, are the diet faculty equipped to do a quick dry run? Now, dry runs are a very NGO thing, right? Like, you do a dry run before your training. Some of the diets we're working with are now doing dry runs. They're like, let's dry run, let's do a presentation first, and then try to, do. It's a very simple thing, but some of these practices need to be adopted. So the more adoption of practices you see, that means they've started internalizing the way of thought process. Let it be in terms of literacy approach, or let it be in terms of how you look at programs and implement them. So I think that's definitely a starting point. Of course, many things have to be there, but the approach towards looking at this problem in a more nuanced way of people who are end beneficiaries owning the change needs to be at the forefront.
Right. If I could ask Gayatri, uh, for example, you showed us the heat map. Imagine, I mean, I'm sure you've done it many times. Imagine talking to a district administration about that heat map. And it would immediately get into a conversation about, like, the reds need to be reduced somehow, like anyhow, hook or by crook. And so whenever, and the concern, the urgency, I think for the last 20 years, rightly and arguably, the country has been obsessed with this urgency to do things. And it needs to be urgent. I completely agree. But in this search for, or in this entire run for urgency, we often look for quicker solutions, which may not be the best. And therefore, just imagine Gayatri having a discussion with somebody in the district or somebody in the state about a heat map, and the guy is startled, and so many reds in my state or so many reds in my district. How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, I think
From the low hanging fruits to the process.
yes. Yeah, I think the discussion generally goes that way when we get started. Like, we need to get rid of it. And I think typically what we generally talk about is quick on action, but being patient with the transformation is the approach that we've started advocating very vocally. That you need to act today, but the transformation takes its own life cycle, and just being patient with that. But when such situations happen, I think one way that we have tried doing, and I think very similar to Madhukar's, is also identifying key players from within the state. Until now, what has happened well is that over the last 2 decades, we've started assessing, monitoring ourselves, which is a good part of it. But it has always been someone external coming and doing for me, and then that someone external then becomes a judge in my mind as a system. So if I move from someone external coming and checking me and giving me gyan to someone who partners with me in developing capacities within the state, on maybe out of 10 picking just 2 aspects of it, giving it a 3 to 5 years run, if we start doing that dialogue, and I think in AP it is turning out pretty well. So I want to just quote that as an example, where you start with, say, 10 teachers, build their capacity on assessments, give them good 3 years, let them design assessments, let them design interventions or classroom training modules. It will take time. I think the challenge will come when we start negotiating the timeline more than the numbers. And that's where, slightly dependent on who the bureaucrat is, but you negotiate. And in certain cases, we found success. Similarly, in Tamil Nadu, I think now going forward, on the basis of baseline, what changes do we want to bring in? I think they're very open to dialogue. Um, so on one side, while monitoring becomes number game to an extent, and I wouldn't deny that, uh, going back to what Reshma also shared, I think continuous dialogue and awareness is the only way we can take it forward.
Right. Sona ma'am, I mean, my last question, I mean, we'll have to open it up for the audience if we have time. So, how do you, in a system, in a large scale system, balance between the immediate deliverables versus the right processes which will lead to those? How do you do that? I mean, with
I
all your
believe,
challenges, achievements, everything.
I think I speak on behalf of the many KVNs here. Yes, there is always this desire. Sometimes it's not just top driven, it is everywhere. There is this desire to have better numbers, better optics. But we do realize this is students we are dealing with, this is children, this is a system, the teachers, they're not files and they're not things, so it will take time. But yes, we will also wait. So, like you said, quick in action, we have to, wherever we see that these practices are actually getting results, these are things which can, at least if nothing is perfect, we can't wait for that perfect solution. So whatever we see is getting good results or is making an impact, we try and bring it into the system. And like I said, we have this habit of quickly, sharing of good practices at very levels, many levels we have. So whatever works for us in one system, not always will it work in all the other KVs, but we tend to share, and then everybody tries and makes it their own. So what is happening in one place in Aurangabad is not happening in Nasik, or is not happening in Pune, but different things are happening. And yes, we are open, and there is a certain amount of not total, but teacher autonomy is there in our system, and we try and we welcome that autonomy. We welcome what the teacher brings to the table also. So I don't know how I've answered your question, but we are open and we do accept nothing happens overnight. But yes, we're always in a hurry. We all are, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, before you
Yeah,
open
please,
three
please,
things,
please.
I think what you were saying is right. I think assessment is taken as
You
the
want
end.
to, right? Yeah.
I think
Assessment is taken as the end goal, and we're all teaching for an assessment. So in Maharashtra itself, in a span of 3 months, you would have had 4 or 5 types of assessment. So that's one thing. The second is, I think, the research and the reports that come out and the way they're disseminated, they're very difficult to understand, right? It's not just the language in terms of whether it's English or Marathi, but the way it's written because of the technicality. So who are we disseminating to, and therefore what are we saying? And the third also is a culture around data. I don't think as a culture we talk about data reading is not the same as 23% children can't read. It is going deeper, saying what, where, how. So I think those are some of the things as well that matter when we're talking about assessment.
Thank you. Do we have time to open this up for the audience? I don't think so. Yes, please.
One question is, Reshma said you like that you're happy to share the report. I have the report, but that report's only the ORS logs. You mentioned so many different things that you all looked at. Where can we get the data on that?
Okay.
The reports on.
So I'll have to check. I know that the raw data was being processed in some way, but it's not readily available to be shared currently. But I know they're also working on other reports that can be in the public domain. Right?
Okay.
That is a process that is being worked on right now.
Okay, and if Tara team needs any technical information on even the ORF part,
Okay.
would that be possible, just so that they can learn and collaborate and
at least there is some syncing
there is
between
some
the
syncing,
right? No,
any
makes
technical
sense.
thing. So if you could help with any of that,
Sure, I can.
And even like, the items that you finally chosen to be tested. And some visibility to that.
Sure.
Because that also helps us understand if there's anything that you would want to add from there or add to there.
Right.
Correct. No, I think also the framework, right, of the entire process, so that we're not all doing different things. It makes sense.
Do we have time? Or I mean, in case, no, I think the more important question is do.
Yeah, we had some for the morning, but then they are more appropriate for the next panel. Okay. So we bring them up in there.
Thank you.